The applause was still ringing in my ears when Marcus leaned in. His whisper cut deeper than any blade. "The board already voted. You're out." My fingers clenched around the tablet I'd just stolen from him, the only weapon left. The protesters surging toward the stage weren't here for justice. They were here to bury me. One wrong move, and the world would see me as the villain. The live feed was still rolling. I had seconds to turn this into a fight instead of an execution. Sarah's voice crackled in my earpiece. "The morality clause is gone. Michael erased it." The floor tilted. No safety net. No way back. Just the cold weight of the tablet in my hand and the truth burning through me. I'd been played from the start. The air in the Hudson Yards Gala Hall was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the metallic tang of high-end air conditioning. Julian Sterling adjusted his silver cufflinks, ensuring they were perfectly parallel to his sleeves. This was his moment. The Centennial merger was more than a deal. It was the fortification of his legacy. He stood at the edge of the stage, the polished wood beneath his Italian leather shoes feeling solid, dependable. Across the room, the skyline of Manhattan glittered through the floor-to-ceiling glass, a grid of light he had spent 20 years mastering. Marcus Thorne approached him, his eyes like polished obsidian. He didn't blink. He never did. Marcus leaned in, his shoulder brushing Julian's, invading that precise 4-foot perimeter Julian preferred to keep. The smell of Marcus's cologne, something sharp and woodsy, cloyed at Julian's senses. "Julian," Marcus whispered, his voice a low vibration that barely carried over the hum of the crowd. "You should enjoy the applause while it lasts." Julian didn't turn his head. "The signatures are dry, Marcus. The board has spoken." "The board has changed its mind," Marcus replied. He pulled a tattered sugar packet from his breast pocket, the paper crinkling rhythmically between his thumb and forefinger. It was a sound Julian had learned to loathe. "While you were checking your cufflinks, I was checking the temperature of the room. There's been a coup. You're out, Julian, effective the moment I stepped to that microphone." Julian's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of granite. He watched Marcus walk toward the podium, every step a theft. His empire, his safety, his life's work. It was being stripped away in front of 1,000 people in silk and wool. The world felt like it was tilting, the floor no longer a solid plane but a sliding deck. He couldn't let the silence swallow him. Julian caught the eye of Sarah Johnson, who stood near the tech booth, her fingers dancing over a tablet. She looked up, a smudge of ink on her cheek, her eyes wide with a frantic, brilliant light. Julian tapped his watch twice, the signal they had practiced for a catastrophic failure. "Sorry." He saw her mouth move, the word a silent prayer to the air. "Sorry, sorry." Julian didn't need her apologies. He needed her genius. He moved toward the edge of the stage, his mind a whirlwind of legal contingencies and right-hand turns. He leaned toward a hidden microphone near the floral arrangement. "Sarah," he hissed, his voice clinical and cold. "Execute the dark out. Stall the feed. I need 5 minutes before the world knows I'm a ghost." At that moment, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall burst open. It wasn't the press. A group of men in dark hoodies, their faces obscured by masks, surged into the room. They weren't shouting slogans. They were moving with a practiced military precision that screamed hired muscle. The crowd erupted into a high-pitched wail of panic. Julian saw Senator William Adams standing frozen near the center of the stage. The old man was clutching his wallet, his knuckles white. Julian didn't think about the board or the merger. He thought about the left turn that had killed his brother, the suddenness of impact, the way the world could end in a heartbeat if no one took control. He lunged. Julian's shoulders slammed into the first masked man who reached the stairs. The impact was dull and heavy, the smell of stale sweat and cheap laundry detergent filling Julian's nose. He shoved the attacker back, feeling the man's ribs flex under his hands. "Senator, move!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking the air like a whip. He grabbed the senator by the elbow, steering the older man toward the heavy velvet curtains. The chaos was a physical weight. The sound of breaking glass, the thud of feet on carpet, the screaming. But through the melee, Julian's eyes stayed locked on Marcus. Marcus wasn't running. He was standing by the podium, watching the violence with the detached interest of a man watching a movie he had already directed. In the scramble, Marcus's encrypted tablet slid across the mahogany surface of the speaker's stand. It was a sleek, black slab of glass that held the keys to everything. Julian dived for it. His fingers grazed the cold metal, gripping it tight. He tucked the device under his arm, the weight of it a small, hard victory against his chest. "I have it," Julian muttered into his lapel mic. "Sarah, I'm coming to the secondary exit. Meet me at the industrial lift." He maneuvered through the panicked guests, his body a shield for the senator. He avoided the main exits, his mind mapping the route in right-hand turns through the service corridors. He could feel the eyes of the security cameras tracking him, but he didn't care. He had the tablet. He had a chance. He found Sarah in the dim light of the freight elevator. The air here smelled of grease and old cardboard. She was already tapping into her laptop, her breath hitching in her throat. "Julian, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her fingers flying. "I'm trying to get into the tablet, but the locks they're like iron doors with no handles." "Break them," Julian commanded. He leaned against the vibrating metal wall of the elevator. "Marcus mentioned a coup. I need to know who signed the papers." Sarah's face was illuminated by the blue light of the screen. "It's not just the board, Julian. It's the legal filings. I'm looking at the digital vault now." Her voice trailed off, becoming a thin, sharp thread of fear. "Oh no. What is it, Sarah? Speak clearly." "The morality clause," she said, her voice trembling. "The one you were going to use to void Marcus's shares if he acted against the firm. It's gone. Deleted from the final version of the merger." Julian felt a cold prickle dance across his skin. "That's impossible. Michael Davis handled the final filing. He gave me his word. He quoted his father's maxims about the perimeter being strong." "Michael didn't just leave a gap in the perimeter, Julian," Sarah said, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. "He opened the gate. He's the one who deleted the clause. He's been working for Marcus for months." Julian gripped the edge of a packing crate, the rough wood digging into his palms. The betrayal wasn't a sudden blow. It was a slow-acting poison he had been swallowing for weeks. He had trusted the rules, the contracts, the precision of the law. But the law was just a tool, and Marcus had hired a better mechanic. The elevator shuddered to a halt. The doors slid open to reveal the green room, a space of false comfort with plush velvet chairs and the cloying chemical scent of new car spray. Julian stepped out, his mind already racing toward the next move. But as he crossed the threshold, the heavy steel door behind him slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. The electronic lock chirped, a high, mocking sound. "Sarah," Julian called out, reaching for his earpiece. Static was his only answer. A faint hissing sound began to fill the room. It was coming from the ventilation shafts near the ceiling. Julian looked up, his eyes stinging. The air was beginning to shimmer with a pale, translucent mist. Sedative gas, Julian whispered to the empty room. They didn't just want him fired. They wanted him gone. They wanted him sleeping while they told the world his career was over. Julian scrambled across the room, his eyes searching for an exit. The windows were reinforced glass, overlooking the Hudson with a cold indifference. He looked at the coffee table. A bowl of wax fruit sat there, one real apple rotting in the center. He grabbed a heavy bronze award trophy from the mantel, the metal cold and heavy in his hand. He lunged for the maintenance duct in the corner of the ceiling. He swung the trophy with everything he had. The sound of metal meeting metal rang through the room, vibrating up his arm. The duct cover buckled. Another strike, and the grate fell, clattering onto the plush carpet. Julian hauled himself up, the narrow space of the duct pressing against his shoulders. The air here was hot, smelling of scorched dust and industrial machinery. He crawled, his knees scraping against the jagged metal seams. Right turn. Always right, he told himself. The old trauma of the left turn collision guiding him through the dark. Julian, can you hear me? Sarah's voice crackled back to life in his ear. The building's internal network is fighting me, but I have the floor plans. You're in the service spine. If you go 50 feet and take the next 2 rights, you'll hit the service corridor for the kitchen. I'm moving, Julian gasped, the heat in the duct making his lungs burn. Where is Miller? The security chief? He's on the move, Julian. He's counting the tiles. He's looking for you. Julian reached the end of the duct and then kicked out the exit grate. He dropped onto the concrete floor of a service corridor. The air here was a stagnant 88 degrees, thick with the weight of the skyscraper above him. He stood up, brushing the dust from his suit, his heart a frantic drumbeat in his chest. He didn't see Robert Miller until he was 10 feet away. The man was massive, a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow. He was standing perfectly still, his eyes darting toward the ceiling, his lips moving in a silent count. 42, Miller whispered. He looked down at Julian. There was no anger in his eyes, only a cold military efficiency. Mr. Sterling, Miller said, you're supposed to be asleep. Miller lunged. He moved with a violent grace that Julian wasn't prepared for. A massive fist slammed into Julian's ribs, knocking the air from his lungs in a sickening whoosh. Julian fell back, his head hitting the concrete wall. The world blurred, the sound of his own blood rushing in his ears like a flood. Miller stepped forward, his boots clicking rhythmically on the floor. He reached for a heavy metal pipe hanging from a rack. Julian's hand scrambled along the wall, his fingers closing around the cold, pressurized cylinder of a fire extinguisher. He didn't wait. He pulled the pin and squeezed the handle. A cloud of white chemical powder erupted, filling the narrow corridor with a blinding, choking fog. Miller roared, the sound muffled by the spray. Julian swung the extinguisher like a club, feeling it connect with Miller's shoulder. The big man stumbled, coughing, his hands clawing at his eyes. Julian didn't stay to finish the fight. He dove through a heavy security door, the weight of it slamming shut behind him. He was in the kitchen now. The air was a battlefield of clattering metal and the high-pitched whine of industrial dishwashers. He ducked behind a prep station, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He pulled out Marcus's tablet. The screen was still active, Sarah's bypass software humming in the background. Sarah, I'm in, Julian whispered. Look at the data transmission. There's a secondary stream. I see it, Sarah replied, her voice now sharp with professional focus. Julian, the merger isn't about clean energy. They're pivoting the entire infrastructure. They're installing surveillance nodes in the grid. This isn't a company anymore. It's a private eye for the government. Julian stared at the scrolling lines of code on the tablet. The names of the board members were listed alongside high-level political signatures. Marcus Thorne wasn't the architect of this. He was the foreman. "It's a surveillance firm," Julian said, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. "They're using my legacy to build a cage." He looked at the tablet, seeing the signature of Senator James Johnson at the bottom of the revised articles. "Sarah," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "Who is James Johnson?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "He's my father, Julian," Sarah whispered. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Julian let the tablet slide from his fingers onto the stainless steel table. The betrayal was complete. The man he had protected on the stage was the one who had sharpened the knife. Sarah's father was the architect of the coup, and Marcus was his hand-picked successor. He felt the walls closing in, the weight of the Hudson Yards towers pressing down on him. He had no funds, no legal identity, and no friends. He was a ghost in his own building. "Julian, you have to move," Sarah said, her voice regaining its strength. "The press conference starts in 5 minutes. If Marcus speaks, the merger becomes public record. You have to stop him." Julian looked at a staff locker near the back of the kitchen. A white uniform hung there, pristine and anonymous. He stripped off his ruined suit jacket, the silk torn and stained with chemical powder. He pulled on the kitchen whites, the fabric rough against his skin. He began to run. He didn't take the elevators. He took the stairs, his heart hammering against his bruised ribs. He moved toward the main stage, a white blur in the shadows of the building he had built. He reached the backstage rigging, the heavy velvet curtains smelling of dust and old theater. He could hear the low murmur of the audience on the other side, the sound of 1,000 people waiting for his downfall. Marcus was there, standing in the wings. He was adjusting his tie, his eyes fixed on the podium. "It's over, Julian," Marcus said, not even turning around. "I can hear your breathing. It's too fast. You're losing control." "The surveillance pivot, Marcus," Julian said, stepping out of the shadows. "The board won't survive the scandal when I tell the press." Marcus turned then. He held up his smartphone, the screen glowing in the dim light. "You won't tell them anything," Marcus said. The screen showed a live video feed. It was a sun-drenched living room in a quiet suburb. Julian's sister, Emily, was sitting on her sofa, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. 2 men in dark suits stood behind her, their hands on her shoulders. "She's humming, Julian," Marcus said, leaning in close. "That funeral song she likes. Do you want to hear the end of it?" Julian felt his knees go weak. The precision, the legal loopholes, the right-hand turns. None of it mattered. They had his sister. "What do you want?" Julian whispered. "Walk out there," Marcus said, pointing to the stage. "Tell the world you're retiring for health reasons. Hand the reins to me. If you say one word about the surveillance or the board, the feed goes dark. And so does she." The countdown on the wall hit 0. The lights on the stage flared to a blinding, diamond-like intensity. Julian Sterling, the smartest man in the room, the master of the legal loophole, stepped into the light. The applause was a deafening roar, a wave of sound that felt like it would knock him over. He walked to the podium, his hands gripping the wood so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at the sea of faces, the cameras, the red lights of the live broadcast. He saw Senator Johnson in the front row, smiling that practiced, predatory smile. Julian took a breath. The air smelled of ozone and expensive perfume. "I have spent my life building this company," Julian began, his voice steady, clinical. "I have followed every rule, every law, every line of every contract. He paused. He looked at the emergency broadcast button on the side of the podium, a small red toggle designed for fires or terror attacks. But today, Julian said, his voice rising, I am activating the Code Red emergency protocol for all Sterling-owned properties. This includes the private residence of Emily Sterling. In the wings, Marcus's face contorted in rage. He lunged for the stage, but the alarm had already triggered. A high-pitched, rhythmic wail began to vibrate through the floor. The security detail at my sister's house is currently on my payroll, Julian shouted over the alarm. And per the protocol I just triggered, their primary directive is now to hold all occupants for the New York Police Department. They are no longer working for you, Marcus. They are working for the law. He didn't wait for the fallout. He looked directly into the lead camera, his eyes burning. And under the Founder's Grant of 1925, Julian said, I hereby divert all merger liquidity into the New York Public Housing Trust. The company is broke, Marcus. You didn't buy an empire. You bought a debt. The room erupted into a different kind of chaos. Julian turned and walked off the stage, past the frozen, horrified face of Marcus Thorne, past the shouting senator. He walked out of the Hudson Yards, away from the glass and steel, away from the precision and the right-hand turns. He stepped into the New York night, the air smelling of hot trash and sour milk. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever smelled. He watched the news ticker on the side of a building, a ribbon of red text announcing the collapse of the Sterling-Thorne merger. He had lost his title. He had lost his firm. But as he walked toward the subway, Julian Sterling realized he was no longer a ghost. He was finally, for the first time in his life, a man who could turn whichever way he damn well pleased. The end.